Hello everyone, my name's Tim from Welcome to the Table, and today we're not at my table, we're in my car. I decided to start a video series taking advantage of the fact that I've got a 40-minute drive to get to work, to just ramble about board games for that time. So that's what this series is going to be. It's gonna each episode I'm gonna pick a game or a couple of games or a topic to just talk about. It's not going to be anything. It's going to have to be stuff that I'm familiar with. Obviously, I can't stop or I can't read anything or show any components or anything like that as I am driving. So what can you do? Today I want to talk about one of the games that got my group properly into board gaming, and the genre it basically created. And that game is Dominion, and the genre is deck building. So what is deck building? Deck building, if you've ever played a game like Magic the Gathering, the Pokemon card game, Yu-Gi-Oh!, any of those, you know what those kinds of card games are like. You draw cards off your deck, you do stuff with them, you have some goal to win the game. Deck building's a little different. How it works is each person starts with the same basic deck. In the case of Dominion, you got a little bit of victory points and you got a little bit of money. And how the game plays is using what you have in your deck. There will be a central shop of cards that everyone has access to. And each card will tell you, oh, it costs this much currency and does this stuff. And these will be where your more powerful cards come from. And the game is in creating an engine with your deck that you can cycle through and work towards winning the game. In the case of Dominion, it's buying up land, provinces, estates, that kind of stuff. That's all cards that you add to your deck that give you points at the end of the game but do nothing for you otherwise. There are a few other games like it, but Dominion was the first, and it was the one that created the whole genre, and actually spawned some subgenres like Quarriors. If you want to look it up, it's QUARRIORS, I think, like Warriors, but QU instead of W. And that's like a dice pool building game. It's the same kind of mechanic, but instead of cards, you're buying dice to add to your pool, and you add them to a pouch, and you pull out a certain number of dice each turn, and that's like your hand of cards. And you roll them, they each do different things. And it's a great game too. A bit more reliant on randomness because it is dice, whereas the advantage of most deck builders is the only real randomness is in your deck itself. The rest of it's all, the odds, and it's all straightforward. Dominion, if you've never played it before, is a very straightforward card game that has a ridiculous number of expansions, and even I think got a second edition within the past couple of years. And how it works, like I said, is you have your deck. Over the course of the game, you buy cards to add to your deck to try and be able to afford the really high victory point cards that you then buy to your deck. Buy and add to your deck to try and win the game. And it had this neat system. Well, not so much a system. Its gameplay was very simple. You could explain it very easily because actually playing the game was as simple as ABC: action, buy, cleanup. So each turn you can play one action card. Each turn you can buy one card, and then after you're done all of that, you wipe your play area in front of you to the discard pile. You discard the rest of your hand to the discard pile, and you draw back up to 5 cards. That's it. Some action cards give you more actions, letting you chain together more and more action cards, and that's going to be how you're going to be able to do a lot of the more complicated stuff. Some cards let you buy more cards. It'll say like +1 buy, +1 action, +2 gold, different things like that. And then some of them do weird stuff, like increase the value of all your coppers, which is one of your currency types, because you can quite literally just buy more money. You start with coppers in Dominion, and then they're each worth 1, and then you can upgrade. Not so much upgrade. You can upgrade, but that's a different card. You can buy silvers, and silvers are a card that costs you 3 currency and is valued at 2. Why is that good? Well, then when you draw it, it's 2 currency in 1 card, and you're drawing 5 cards, so the more of those you got, the more the more power you've got there in terms of buying power. And then you can eventually get gold, which costs 6, I think, but is worth 3. There's a few different strategies. The strategy is going to depend on what cards you have in the offer, because that's going to be different every time, and depending on what expansions you play with, that's going to affect what you have in the offer. And there's a lot of variability in it, a lot of replayability in it, just because of all of the different expansions. When I picked up Dominion originally, it was a big box version of it that came with the Alchemy expansion and the Prosperity expansion. The Alchemy expansion was a small box expansion, added a few cards. It also added a dual currency system with potions, where you could buy potion cards, and some cards needed money and potions. So you had to, have money and potions in your hand at the same time to be able to buy some of these cards, that kind of thing. And then Prosperity was the big money expansion that adds colonies, which are 10 victory point cards compared to the provinces, which are 6, and then adds it just increases money. It adds platinum, which is worth 5. I did end up buying a few other expansions, and my brother had a few other expansions, but there's a ton of them, and you can just kind of look them up online if you want, pick the ones that you like, and go from there. That's about all I'm going to say about Dominion, though, because it is probably one of the more elegant deck building games, one of the more simplified ones, but in the same vein, it's also one of the least interesting ones. I played a few of these other deck buildings. I haven't played all of them. There's a few that I haven't played, like Thunderstone or Ascension. I haven't played either of those. But there are games that have just kind of expanded on this and used deck building as not so much the game as a aspect of the game. So one of the ones I'll talk about is Trains. Trains is a game. It is another deck building game that sees you all as rail barons in Japan, and your train company is your deck, but there's also a board, and the board represents the area that you and the people around the table are competing for, and you can get points by building laying rails on the board, expanding stations and cities, and expanding your network out to distant locations, or you can get points purely through your deck by buying real estate, buying apartments, skyscrapers, any of that kind of stuff, and that also gives you points. And one of the more frustrating aspects of Dominion was when you get into the more complicated combos, counting actions. Counting actions, seeing how many you have left, can be frustrating. Train simplifies that by saying you just play as many action cards on your turn as you want, which felt a lot cleaner, to be honest. And Trains has become my group's go-to deck building game. I ended up giving my copy of Dominion to my brother, who had a bunch of the other expansions, as well as the one standalone expansion, Dominion Intrigue, and he plays it with his wife. And yeah, Trains just has a bit more going on. Another deck builder game that I've played is A Few Acres of Snow. And A Few Acres of Snow is a 2-player game, which might not be what you're looking for, but what it does really well. So it imagines the two of you are generals commanding the British and French militaries in the time of, like in Canada, in the time of when Upper and Lower Canada were still separate colonies for the English and the French, vying for control of the area. And it also is a board with locations and routes and that kind of stuff. But what the deck represents in that case is this represents your kind of your army. Yeah, it represents your army, but it represents your... I mean, you have cards that represent your military, your actual soldiers. You have cards that represent the Native Americans that you've hired. You have cards that represent the locations you control. So you can go into a situation where you're trying to fight a war, and you're going through your deck for soldiers, and all you've got locations. Your deck doesn't have any soldiers. They're all tied up elsewhere, or you need boats, and no, don't have any boats, or anything at all, and no, can't. We don't have the money to buy recruit new units or anything. It's all kind of, your deck bites you back because you've created this thing that just isn't cooperating with you. Because as you buy more soldiers, as you take more land, this all is represented by cards that add to your deck that make it harder and harder to get exactly what you want. And one of the ways you can help with that is by buying. It's basically legislation. Like when this card shows up, you can use it to discard and remove cards from your deck. But then you can't get rid of that card, and it represents kind of logistics and the logistics of saying, yeah, we need more administration. We need people running this stuff in the background for me while I'm actually managing the war, and then you're tripping over all the desks and the office people that you've created jobs for. And it's great. It's cutthroat, it's brutal, and it is a really well done deck builder, really well crafted. The theme's going to put some people off, the art style's going to put some people off, but I would definitely recommend you take a look at it if it's something you might be interested in, because it is very well made. Another deck building game that we do play is called Arctic Scavengers. Most deck building games generally are for up to 4 players. Arctic Scavengers can actually do up to 5. And whereas with most deck builders, not all, the ones that I've mentioned have a bit less of this, but with most deck builders, like most of the early deck builders, you're just sitting at the table playing your game, not really interacting with everyone else, unless you get the odd attack card that says, oh, you have to, I'm using an attack card, you have to discard a card. Not much player interaction. Arctic Scavengers takes that and says, all right, well, we're gonna have people fight. We're gonna have people fight and fight over resources. It imagines you as kind of leaders of gangs of people in a post-apocalyptic frozen wasteland just trying to survive. And at the end of the game, whichever gang has the highest population wins. Straight up. So you need people. Well, how do you get people? Well, you need to hunt. How do you hunt? Well, your scavengers can go get you food. You can maybe send a scavenger with a spear, would augment that, or you can get a little bit of food to let you get some hunters who are really good at hunting, and then use them to get more food to bring in some of the better people. But then there's a junkyard pile that you can send characters in to go digging through, which it's a big thick stack of cards that starts out great. There's spears and there's medicine and pills and all that stuff in there, but as people are rooting through it, you'll find refugees that people have just left in the junkyard pile because refugees don't really do anything for you, and when you really need to just keep your deck to the good cards, you might just discard some of them into the junkyard, which is totally valid, except at the end of the game, when population is what matters and you can't afford to buy any more people, you're going to end up sending your field crews and your all your special people digging through the junkyard pile just to get those refugees back. And leads to some very hilarious moments where you're cleaning up the game or cleaning up the cards at the end of the game, and you're looking through the junkyard pile, and there's about 20 refugees in there because people have just gotten rid of all of their basic refugee cards. None of this is explaining the point that I was trying to make. The point that I was trying to make was there's a mechanic in the game called what's it called? The skirmish. That's what it's called. Where one person each round is going to be the initiator, and they're the person that's going to go first. There's a card that represents it, and it kind of moves clockwise. So every round, one person starts, and then next round, the person next to him goes first. The initiator, after the first couple of turns, you start getting into the actual clock for the most deck builders end when a certain number of stacks of cards run out, or someone plays all the usually they end not so much on a timer, they end when people have just bought enough stuff to end the game. Arctic Scavengers has an actual clock, and the clock is represented by the 20 card contested resources deck. You start fighting over these after, I think it's the third round. And at the start of each round, once this is getting going, whoever is the initiator gets to take a look at the top card of the contested resources deck. And these are great. These are, you got sled team or wolf packs, you got sled teams, you got grenades, you've got field crew, you got it's all good. But you got families in there, huge groups of population in one card worth tons of points, and so you want them, but everyone else wants them too. And so then how the game works at that point is you play through the round knowing that the player that's the initiator has seen what you're fighting over at the end of the round. They play through their turn and they keep some cards back. Then it goes to the next person. They play through their turn. They keep some cards back. And you go until everyone's had their turn, and then you have the skirmish. And you reveal what you've got left, and there's a little symbol on the cards that tells you what its fight value is. Some cards don't have a fight value, like refugees, they don't. And whoever has the higher fight value wins the skirmish. If there's a tie, whichever one that was tied has the higher population wins the skirmish. And then they take that contested resources card. Oh, that's actually something I forgot, which is very interesting. So much of Arctic Scavengers information is hidden. So any cards you buy from the shop, yeah, everyone gets to see that. But any cards you take from the junkyard get added to your discard pile face down. Any cards you get from the contested resources deck get added to your discard pile face down. No one knows for sure what you got until those cards show up later, which was very interesting. Makes it like when you're trying to figure out what kind of a force your opponent has, not really knowing if they got a grenade, which gives you 3 fight from the contested resources deck, and then that shows up and like, oh no, it's devastating. So yeah, whoever wins the skirmish takes that card, adds it to the discard pile, and then initiate your turns. You discard the rest of your hand, shuffle up, good to go. Where this gets even more interesting is there's cards like the saboteurs or the sniper teams that can actually disable cards for the skirmish. Saboteurs can give you a fight, or you can use them to disable a tool, like a spear or a grenade or anything that you would normally have to equip to a unit. And discard, like it's discarded, they can't use it in the skirmish, it doesn't count. But you don't get the saboteur's fight value for your force. The sniper team lets you pin down people, and which can be huge, because if you're in a situation where you're fighting someone and they only kept 2 cards back, and it's like a gang of thugs and a weapon, you can shoot out, take down the thugs. Their weapon does nothing. There's no one using the weapon, and you've taken them out of the fight. But anyone that has a sniper team or saboteur that kept it for the skirmish can do this. So if you're in a situation where you don't think you can win the skirmish, you can always just keep one of these cards back, look at who's going to win, and say, you're getting too strong. I don't want you to win this resource. I'm going to take out your unit and lose you the skirmish, which is interesting. It's cutthroat. biting. And it's great. There was a big box version of it that came out. That I have the thing. It added the couple of mini expansions that came out with the base game, and then a bigger expansion. I haven't touched any of them. Like, there's so much just on offer with the base game that myself and my friends haven't feel like we've played it enough to get a handle on how it works to even add any of the other stuff yet. Like, there's a whole completely alternate set of cards that you can use, and there's tribal leaders that on average give your useless refugees something that they can actually do and be good at. There's all this kind of stuff, but we haven't really played with any of it, so I don't really know anything about it, other than, I've looked at the cards and I've seen them, and they do look very interesting. And the last deck builder that I want to talk about is actually going to be Mage Knight. Now, if you look Mage Knight up online, you're going to look at that and think I'm crazy, because it's got a huge board, it's got so much components, it is a big game, it is a complicated game. But it is, at its heart, it is a deck builder. Mage Knight is a game where you and everyone around the table are one of the titular Mage Knights. Super powerful magic people that are shot out of a portal into this world that you have to explore, and depending on the scenario that you're playing, which there is a ton of, especially with the expansion content, they each add a bunch of new scenarios that you can play. Your objective is going to be different every time. It could be a solo game, it could be a co-op game, it could be a co-op game with like 2 teams of 2, it could be a fully competitive game. It's all over the place. But and it's an RPG with levels and influence and armies and relics and all this kind of stuff. But at its heart, your Mage Knight and all the stuff your Mage Knight can do is represented by a deck of cards. And like the other deck builders, you all start with a very basic deck of cards. Mage Knight does this thing where, depending on what character you're playing, one of the basic cards is unique. Like, it's a special version of it that's a bit better for that specific character. But you all start with a pretty basic set of cards, and you can improve it by training in a monastery to learn advanced actions, by burning that monastery to the ground and fighting the residents there to get a relic that they had, or learning the spells, super powerful spells from a wizard's tower, or just leveling up and getting cards added to your deck. And these all represent your combat value, your movement, your influence that you use to recruit people or to heal or to train, any of that kind of stuff. Your big high damage spells that you're going to be using to fight the big hard enemies, any of that kind of stuff. And also kind of your health. So Mage Knight is a game where you can't be killed. Your characters are so powerful that they cannot be killed. You can be wounded, you can get knocked unconscious, but you can't die. But any wounds you take are just wound cards that get added to your deck that just gum up your hand, because they just sit in your hand when they show up, and you can't really get rid of them very easily. Much like the victory point cards of Dominion, they just kind of sit there and don't really do anything for you. But yeah, so the game becomes a lot of managing your character with your passive abilities, with your deck, with your army, and any of that kind of stuff, but also managing your deck itself, and fighting with your deck itself. Like, you want to fight something, but all you draw is influence, and you're not in anywhere that you can even spend that influence. You're trying to explore, and all you draw are spells or healing cards or any of that kind of stuff. Or you want to do anything at all, and you draw just like a mixed hand that is a little bit of fight, a little bit of healing, but not enough to really do anything. And that's the same, that problem, that challenge is the same challenge that you'll see in just about any deck building game. as your deck just doesn't play with you. I think everyone should have a deck builder. They're great games. They're, for the most part, simple. Mage Knight and Arctic Scavengers are exceptions, different reasons. Arctic Scavengers is a game, you know, it can take an hour and a half, but it's got a little bit of complicatedness with like the way the different cards work and the skirmish and any of that kind of stuff. And Mage Knight is just a ridiculous game. My brother and I played a version of it that was like the big epic campaign. We played it on like all the longest settings of it, with each of us playing 2 characters, and it took 11 hours. Now most games in Mage Knight take a couple, but that one was ridiculous. But it was fun. Like, we had a ton of fun doing it. So I definitely think that everyone should own a deck builder of some kind. And you just have to think about what theme you like, what style of game you like. Dominion is a good one to start. Of course it is. It wouldn't be as popular and it wouldn't be as famous in the hobby if it wasn't. But I feel like, especially with just the base game of Dominion, if you're just buying the base game, I don't feel like Dominion offers a great amount of variety and a great amount of challenge there. I would say Trains would be a really good one to start with, in my opinion. It's got a ton of extra cards. The board and the whole mechanic there adds a new aspect to actually playing the game and winning the game. And you can go into this, with a different strategy every time. You can do a strategy that's all based on real estate. You can do a strategy that's all based on just the board and ending the game as fast as you can to try and deny people points and that kind of stuff. And it's a lot more straightforward to play than Dominion, because you don't have that counting actions problem. So yeah, I would say Trains is if you're looking to try a deck building game and you want one that isn't too complicated, that isn't too competitive. Well, I shouldn't say competitive. One that isn't too complicated. Just say that. Trains would be a great one. There is an expansion for Trains called Rising Sun that does add stuff, but it's kind of meant to be more of a 2-player standalone thing. So the people behind Trains also made Planes and Automobiles. And then they released a big box expansion that's an expansion that expands all 3 Trains, Planes, and Automobiles. So, yeah, because of course they did. So there is content there. I don't know what's in it because I don't have it yet. But I would say, yeah, Trains is a great one to start with. But I do think everyone should have a deck builder of some kind. Warriors is an interesting one, though. I mentioned that at the start. Warriors has many expansions, much like Dominion. It's been around almost as long. I found Warriors to be a lot more kid-friendly, because it's a lot less kind of mathsy, because it's dice. So the way Warriors works is you have a set of, like, a bunch of different sets of dice, and each of these dice represent a different monster or spell or something like that. And you have a stack of cards that represent, like, that tell you, exactly what these dice do, and they just kind of stay in the center the whole game. Trucks. Okay. They just kind of stay in the center of the whole game and kind of tell you how all the different dice work. And I found that because it is dice, and you roll the dice, and that tells you advanced green, and you go straight like a dummy. It limits your options in a kind of like a nice way, because you'll only have a certain number of dice, and you can only use the faces that are shown. So you have a lot more. It's, instead of having a hand of 5 cards that has all these different action cards and you can only play one of them, you have a very clear indicator of, all right, this is what I'm capable of doing. I could summon these monsters, but it costs currency that I need to buy a new die, and I want that die, and I have enough money, so I'm just going to not do anything else. I'm going to do... The one thing with Warriors, though, is it does have a kind of combat mechanic. It's not really it's not a really fleshed out combat mechanic, but it is like that mechanic is how you go on to win the game. And there is a problem. Well, I guess it's a problem with most deck builders, not just Warriors. I noticed it a lot more in Warriors, but now that I think about it, it happens all the time in games like Trains or Dominion. Is because it's about how lucky you get with the cards that you get. If you get a lucky turn at the start, really early on, and you're able to afford an expensive thing while your deck is small or your dice pool is small, and then that just kind of keeps showing up again and again and again and again, it can snowball. You can get really strong really fast, and it can kind of feel like you're skyrocketing ahead from everyone else, and that can kind of suck. But that's a problem with most deck building games. Arctic Scavenger just doesn't have that quite as much, because the cards that you can, because even like the really expensive cards in Arctic Scavengers, you have to work towards being able to even afford, because none of your basic stuff can just buy these expensive cards. You have to work towards it. It can feel a bit rough if someone's constantly winning the skirmish, but then that's cards that they're not spending digging or hunting or any of that kind of stuff, so you can just focus on doing that and probably still win. Because it doesn't matter who wins the skirmish in Arctic Scavengers at the end of the game. It doesn't matter how many skirmishes you won. What matters is the population. So if you're doing other stuff while they're just fighting the skirmish over and over and over again, saving 4 cards every time, not really doing anything with their turn, you probably still have a good chance of winning. Whereas with the other deck building games, it can feel like you just got so far behind so fast because the person got lucky really early on, and that is kind of rough. But they're not really long games, and they're still fun. Even when that happens, you brush it off, you say good game, and you pack it up and play it again next time. Or, like what I usually end up doing, you reset, play again, do better next time. So their deck builders are a type of game that I definitely recommend everyone own at least one if you're trying to get into board gaming, because they are a great introduction. Like the Dominion, Trains, games like that, those are great games to introduce to people that have never played board games before, because the mechanics of them are straightforward. Dominion even more so. Like, as much as I say I'd recommend Trains, Dominion is a much easier game to learn if you've never played board games before, because the round is so simple. ABC, action by cleanup. And, everyone at the table can help you count your actions if you need the help, It's a game to have fun. You don't have to be cutthroat about it all the time. And, you have the people sitting around the table that can help you do your turn, that kind of stuff. And the theme is a bit... Well, deck building themes don't... That's an interesting one to talk about. Deck building themes aren't generally that engaging. Mage Knight has a better one, but Mage Knight is also a board game RPG. So that's got a lot more going on just in general. But you think about Trains, you think about Dominion. The theme's pretty boring. Which most people will be fine with. Some people it might bother them, but whatever. There are games that have bigger themes, like Thunderstone I mentioned, which is your deck is a deck of heroes, and the stuff at the center of the table is monsters that you can fight. But I haven't played it. It's not a game that I've been interested in. Ascension is another one that I don't really know much about. There's Core Worlds is another one that I haven't played before. Like there's a ton. There's a ton of deck builders. Dig into them a little bit. Use Board Game Geek to look up some recommendations. But I just wanted to talk about them because they are a great way to get into the hobby. They're how my group got knee-deep into the hobby and never looked back. And something we're glad we did. Anyway, that's going to be it for today. I have been Tim from Welcome to the Table. And you've been listening to me ramble in my car about deck building games. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all next time.